I walked in after a 12-hour shift covered in drywall dust, craving silence. Instead, I found a crime scene. My drafting table, the place where I designed million-dollar restorations, was shoved into the hallway, sticky with juice stains. Inside my room, the sanctuary I paid rent for, the walls were freshly painted a jarring primary blue. My 6-year-old nephew, Jacob, was throwing plastic blocks against my framed patent schematics, shattering the glass. Leaning against the doorframe, my sister Stephanie was filming an Instagram story. She didn't even look up. "We turned it into a sensory room for Jacob," she said, her thumb hovering over the post button. Mom agreed. "You're hardly ever here anyway." They hadn't just taken my room. They had erased me. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. Chaos is just unstructured noise, an ideal in blueprints. I stood there, letting the cold reality settle over me like a fine layer of dust. My mother, Patricia, walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel as if she hadn't just sanctioned the destruction of my life's work. "Don't be dramatic, Nicole," she said, her tone dismissive. "We put a cot in the laundry alcove for you. It's temporary until Matthew's crypto investments bounce back." Matthew's investments. Stephanie's Instagram career. Jacob's sensory needs. Always someone else's crisis taking precedence over my stability. I looked at the cot they'd set up, squeezed between the washer and the dryer, a physical manifestation of my place in this family. An afterthought, a utility, something to be folded away when not in use. I walked past them, my heavy tool bag digging into my shoulder, and placed my house key on the kitchen counter. The metal clinked against the granite, a sound of finality. "Keep the cot," I said, my voice steady. "I'll sleep at my own place." Patricia scoffed. "Your own place? Where? Under a bridge?" I didn't answer. I just walked out into the cool night air of the city, leaving them confused in the hallway. As I walked, the anger began to thaw, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Why hadn't I fought back sooner? Why had I endured the cramped townhouse, the lack of privacy, the constant demands for money, for so long? It wasn't weakness, it was training. I'd been raised in a prison without bars, a psychological construct built brick by brick since childhood. It was a subtle, insidious form of conditioning, known as learned helplessness. My parents had taught me that my needs were secondary, that my boundaries were selfish, that my existence was a burden I had to constantly repay. Every time I'd tried to assert myself, I'd been guilt-tripped into submission. Every time I'd saved money, a family emergency had drained my account. I'd been paying a guilt tax for years, a levy on my happiness, my success, my very autonomy. I'd believed that if I just worked hard enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, I would eventually earn their love and respect. But standing on the sidewalk, breathing in the city air that smelled of exhaust and freedom, I realized the truth. The debt was imaginary, the guilt was a weapon, and the only way to break the chain was to stop playing the game. I wasn't running away. I was walking towards something I had built with my own 2 hands, something they couldn't take away, couldn't devalue, couldn't destroy. I was walking toward my sovereignty, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I unlocked the heavy oak door of the row house 3 blocks away. Inside, the air smelled of sawdust, fresh paint, and silence, a stark contrast to the stale anxiety and chaos I'd just left behind. This wasn't a construction site anymore. It was a home. My home. I walked through the foyer, running my hand along the banister I'd sanded down by hand, feeling the smooth grain under my fingertips. I'd bought this place as a shell, a derelict building everyone else had given up on. For the past 6 months, while my family thought I was partying or being antisocial, I'd been here, restoring it brick by brick, reclaiming its history and building my future. I went into the kitchen, the marble countertops cool and clean, and filled the kettle. As the water heated, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. It was time to audit the books. For 4 years, I'd been sending $1,200 a month to my father, Thomas. He called it rent, but we both knew what it really was, a subsidy. Without my contribution, they wouldn't have been able to afford the townhouse, let alone Stephanie's organic groceries or Matthew's investment losses. The transaction history scrolled past my eyes, the sheer volume of it making my stomach turn. $1,200 on the first of every month, $300 last week for Stephanie's networking lunch, $200 the week before for emergency car repairs that I suspected were actually concert tickets. I wasn't a freeloader. I wasn't a burden. I was the financier. I had been paying for the very lifestyle that had just rejected me. I had been funding the roof over their heads while they plotted to kick me out from under it. The kettle whistled, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through my thoughts. I poured the water, watching the steam rise, feeling a new kind of resolve harden within me. I opened the scheduled transfers tab. There it was, monthly rent, Dad, set to go out tomorrow. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel guilty. I just tapped cancel. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer? Yes, I whispered to the empty, beautiful room. I'm sure. I deleted the transfer. Then I deleted the emergency fund link I shared with my mother. Then I changed my passwords. One by one, I severed the financial arteries that had kept their dysfunction alive. It was done. And for the first time in years, the balance was finally in my favor. It took exactly 3 days for the silence to break. That was how long it took for the utility bill autopay to bounce. First came the texts. Payment failed? Check your bank. Then the guilt trips from Matthew. You're being petty. Jacob cries because his favorite aunt isn't there. Stephanie posted a story on social media about toxic family members who abandon children during a crisis, featuring a black and white photo of a crying child that I was 90% sure was a stock image. I didn't respond. I kept sanding the banister. On the 4th evening, the banging started. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the pounding of people who believed they owned the property on the other side. I looked through the peephole. My parents, Stephanie and Matthew, were crowded on my stoop, looking frantic and furious. They had tracked me down probably through the location settings I'd forgotten to disable on the shared family cloud. I opened the heavy oak door but blocked the threshold with my body. I didn't invite them in. To invite them in would be to validate their delusion that my sanctuary was communal property. What is this? Patricia demanded, her eyes darting past me to the high ceilings and the custom millwork. Whose house is this, Nicole? Did you sleep with a developer to get this? Is this why you've been working late? I looked at them, really looked at them, and for the first time, I understood the mechanics of their cruelty. It wasn't random. It was a system. They didn't see themselves as villains. In their minds, they were the heroes of a tragedy, and I was the villain for hoarding resources. They had fallen into the trap of normalizing cruelty against the competent to subsidize the incompetent. Because I was strong, they felt entitled to break me. Because Stephanie was fragile, they felt entitled to feed her my parts. They punished me for my stability because it highlighted their chaos. To them, my success wasn't an achievement, it was an insult. I didn't sleep with a developer, I said, my voice flat, echoing in the quiet street. I reached into the console table by the door and picked up a manila folder I had prepared the day I moved out. I handed it to my father. Open it. Thomas fumbled with the papers. It wasn't an eviction notice. It was a closing disclosure statement and a patent sale receipt. I am the developer, I said. He stared at the figure highlighted at the bottom of the page. $600,000. I designed a modular housing system, I explained, watching the color drain from Stephanie's face as she realized the magnitude of what she had mocked as dirty construction work. I sold the patent last month. I bought this shell with cash. I restored it with my own hands. And the money I sent you? That wasn't rent. That was a donation. It was the only thing keeping your townhouse out of foreclosure. Foreclosure? Matthew choked out. I stopped the transfer yesterday, I said. The bank will likely contact you by Monday. I didn't wait for the screaming to start. I didn't wait for the inevitable pivot from accusation to begging. I stepped back and closed the heavy oak door. The lock clicked into place, a solid, mechanical sound that signaled the end of their access to my life. 2 months passed. I watched the seasons change from the safety of my library, listening to the city's hum instead of my family's chaos. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't need to. Their silence was the loudest confession they could make. They weren't reaching out because they had nothing left to take. Without my monthly subsidy, the inevitable happened. The townhouse, that monument to their appearances, went into foreclosure. Matthew's crypto assets vaporized. Stephanie's influencer career couldn't cover the mortgage. They were forced to downsize, rapidly and humiliatingly. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Stephanie. "Hey! Long time. Just wanted to update you, we found the most charming rental downtown. It's in that newly renovated historic building on 4th. Super affordable. We're really excited for a fresh start." It was a humble brag wrapped in a peace offering, designed to show me they were doing just fine without me. "That's great," I typed back, my fingers hovering over the keys. "Did you apply yet?" "Just submitted it." The property manager asked for a personal reference. "Since we're family, I put you down. Hope that's okay." I closed my messaging app and opened my laptop. I didn't need to write a reference letter. I logged into my property management portal, the back-end system for the LLC I'd formed to manage the buildings I was acquiring to implement my modular designs. There it was, right at the top of the queue. Application number 4092. Applicants: Matthew and Stephanie. They hadn't just applied to a random building. They had applied to my building. The charming, affordable rental was one of the units I had personally designed to showcase affordable luxury. I was the landlord. I clicked open their file. It was a disaster. Credit score, 580. Employment history, self-employed, consultant code for unemployed. Previous landlord reference, evicted due to non-payment. I stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across my face. They thought they were moving on. In reality, they were walking right back into my jurisdiction. But this time, the rules were different. This time, I held the keys. The next day, I agreed to meet them. Stephanie and Matthew walked into the leasing office of the building, looking around with wide, appreciative eyes. Stephanie was already mentally decorating the lobby. "It's even nicer than the photos," she whispered to Matthew. When they turned the corner into the main office, they stopped dead. I was sitting behind the mahogany desk, reviewing blueprints. "Nicole?" Stephanie asked, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "Working," I said, not looking up from the plans. "Take a seat." They sat, exchanging confused, panicked glances. Matthew cleared his throat. "We're here to see the property manager. Is she around?" "You're looking at her," I said, finally meeting their eyes. And the owner. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Stephanie's face went from confusion to a pale, horrified realization. "You own this?" she whispered. "My LLC does," I corrected. "Which means I do." I pulled their application file from the stack on my desk. "Let's review your application, shall we?" I opened the folder. Credit score, 580. Employment history. Consultant for the last 6 months, which usually means unemployed. Previous landlord reference, evicted due to non-payment. I looked up. "Did you think I wouldn't check?" "We're family," Stephanie pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. "We wouldn't do that to you. We just need a chance, Nicole. A fresh start. We can help with the building. I can run the social media." "I don't need social media," I interrupted. "I need rent." I picked up the red stamp sitting on my desk. It was heavy in my hand, a tool of authority I had earned. "I run a business," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "And you are a liability. I can't have tenants who destroy spaces they don't own. I learned that lesson in my own bedroom." I brought the stamp down on the application. The sound was sharp, final, Denied. I slid the paper across the desk. You have 30 days to find somewhere else. Good luck. They stood up slowly, looking at me like they didn't know me. And they didn't. They knew the doormat. They knew the wallet. They had never met the architect. You're cruel, Matthew spat as they turned to leave. No, I said, watching them walk out the door. I'm just closed for business. The family scattered. Without the glue of their shared entitlement to hold them together, they drifted apart. Patricia and Thomas moved into a small condo an hour away, finally living within their means. Stephanie crashed on a friend's couch until she overstayed her welcome, then moved in with the parents she despised. Matthew disappeared into the gig economy, still chasing the next big score. I stayed. I stood in the library of my finished row house, running my hand along the custom bookshelves I'd built. They were filled with the books that used to be piled in a hallway, gathering dust and resentment. Now they had a home, just like me. I wasn't lonely. I was sovereign. The silence in the house wasn't empty. It was expensive. It was the sound of peace I had bought with my own labor and defended with my own boundaries. I walked into the kitchen and poured a cup of coffee, the steam rising in the morning light. I thought about my family, not with anger, but with a distant kind of pity. They hadn't just lost a house. They had lost their reality. Their status, their comfort, their very identity had been a rental paid for by my labor. They had built their self-worth on a foundation of my exploitation. When the host left, the parasites didn't just lose their nourishment. They withered. They had mistaken my silence for weakness and my generosity for obligation. They had believed that power came from demanding, taking, and consuming, but real power, sovereign power, came from building, creating, and owning. I sipped my coffee, looking out the window at the city I helped build. I was safe within walls that I owned, inside and out. I had evicted the guilt, the shame, and the obligation. I had renovated my life from the studs up, and the view from here was magnificent. Have you ever had to build your own sanctuary because the people who were supposed to be your home turned into your stressors? Tell me your story in the comments.